Hello and welcome. Today we've got a gentleman called E.N.G, who is a structural engineer for the last 30 years. And today he's going to be showing us a presentation of 9/11 total collapse hypothesis. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to my Instagram channel at nicholas.veniamin, where you can follow all my daily news reels. E.N.G, thank you so much for joining me. How are you and what have you been up to?
Well, Nick, I've been up to quite a lot with regard to putting together the evidence that we have for 9/11 as structural engineers. We've come to a point where we have amassed considerable evidence, and I've felt that it was quite past due time to start to blow this open and start to show the public what's been going on. Now, I just wanted to point out, Nick, that some of this material has not been actually prepared by me. Uh, some of it has, but it was prepared largely by my colleagues at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That is an initiative that was created by a gentleman called Richard Gage, who is an architect, in 2006, calling for new investigations to the World Trade Center collapse. We didn't believe the official government reports and we dissented very heavily. I added my name to that list in 2006 to that petition when it came out. At the time, it had something like 4,000 architects and engineers signed to it. Subsequent to my signing the petition, about 2 years later, I received a telephone death threat for no other reason than being on that list. Somebody was obviously doing the motions and running through the list, calling up individual people and intimidating them, trying to discourage them from taking this up. Well, that worked. I kept researching all these years. It's been well over 20 years that I've been looking for what the heck has been going on in the world. And I guess my genesis in this quest for knowledge that so many of us are embarked on was firmly grounded in this topic in 9/11. I returned to it in 2023, last year, and I found that the evidence that was amassed and the engineering arguments that were arrived at were considerable. And I decided when I saw some of the machinations of what's been going on in the world out there, some of these deep state creeps who have been making their appearances very clearly known, I thought, you bastards, it's about time that somebody hit back and started to draw some daylight on your black magic to turn this around. I think it's generally acknowledged that 9/11 was the great lie where it was a vertiginous event. Our world made a considerable bad turn for the worse, and we've been living a lie ever since.
No, absolutely, we have, and there's a lot of false flag attacks, and it's an attack on America. It scared a lot of people, and some people say it was planes, and some people say it wasn't, and some people say it was holograms, and some people say it was explosives. But I want to know what you've got to say. So, if you'd like to share your screen and we can follow through the presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
How does that look, Nick?
It looks great.
Okay, so basically, I wanted to pre-qualify this as to what we're actually going to be seeing. We are going to be seeing, originally, this lecture is ideally run in 3 parts. Each part takes 2 hours, okay? For this one, we have less than an hour today, so we've had to compress everything down. I will thereby be stopping only at pre-selected slides. Unfortunately, that may look like I'm really rushing. Well, I actually really am going to be rushing through this. For a more relaxed pace, I have actually gone through and done this thing full format. The intention is today with Nick, we've decided to go with a précis format, a condensed, basically a synopsis of what we're seeing. And so with that, I'm going to launch into it. Let's see here. I've got slide 2 shows a general configuration on the site. Oh, I didn't mention parts 1, 2, and 3. Parts one, part one is going to be dealing with World Trade Center 7, which many people are still unaware that there was a third building, World Trade Center 7, that collapsed that day. Part two will be talking about the infamous Twin Towers that were actually hit by planes. World Trade Center 7, the third building, was not hit by any aircraft. There are still a few people out there who don't know that. And parts 1 and 2 together are effectively analyzed by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth using structural engineering rationale. And the purpose of parts 1 and 2 is effectively to refute the official reports that were done by NIST, which were commissioned by the government to explain the collapses. We have gone through in parts 1 and 2. This material was not prepared by me. It was prepared by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth in an initiative called Project Due Diligence, where an engineer can take that info and present it to the public. In fact, they're encouraged to do so. In fact, they're encouraged to even go online and anonymously download the presentation and present it to the public. That's what I'm doing right here. Part 3, though, goes into an area where architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth didn't really go. They didn't look at an alternative collapse hypothesis because there's extraneous evidence, as we'll see, that parts 1 and 2 don't really explain. They don't explain the free fall rate of collapse, almost free fall rate in the Twin Towers, and quite fast free fall rate for World Trade Center 7. They don't explain the heat twisted steel that was found all throughout. Also, many people don't know that many toasted vehicles, for lack of a better term, were found around the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 during and after collapse. And these looked very much like the vehicles that were found. The damage was very much like the vehicles that were found in the recent Maui event. And furthermore, the pulverization of the floor slabs turning into so much dust was also very peculiar, and it wasn't really handled very well. So I have come up with, in part 3, and I'll show you when I get to it, a hypothesis how that really happened. Well, of course, there is one other big thing that parts 1 and 2 don't explain, is why in the heck did that third tower actually collapse? What brought it down? Like, why did it have to come down? It's obvious that these buildings had to come down for somebody. Why did the third one come down? And we'll get to all that. This slide here shows the lay of the land. It shows the 3 buildings. And can you see my cursor, Nick, when I move it around?
Yeah, sure, I can. Yeah.
Twin Towers are there. This is taken from a fairly high angle. And then the third tower, you can see World Trade Center 7 is off to the side. I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is a diagram taken from the Washington Post that is meant to really, in the gist of it, de-emphasize that third tower, make it look smaller than it is. But it wasn't a small tower. In fact, it would have been, it's here, actually. This is the size. It wasn't squat and dinky like the diagram says. It was a 47-story tower, and it would have been the tallest tower in approximately 26 states in the contiguous United States. What many people don't know about this tower, it was shaped in plan. This is a bird's eye view of it. We call it a plan view. What many people don't know, including myself, until we took a good look at the evidence, is that this tower is built on a power station that was constructed prior to the tower going up. It is indicated, that power station, at the footprint level in blue. That's the outline of the power station, and this crosshatch trapezoid is the outline of the tower that's built above it, World Trade Center 7. This is a typical floor plan of World Trade Center 7. I hope you don't mind that I'm not docking myself too long on any of these slides. But one of the key areas as far as the official report has to do with this area of the floor plan, and in particular this column 79. They are labeled using these hexagonal numbers. A girder is a steel member that's in the floor that's supporting these beams that are in blue. The girder is in black, the beams are blue. And in the subsequent slide here, slide number 8, this actually shows what I was just pointing to. The black line is this girder here. We call it a girder because it's picking up other beams. Really, the NIST report is relying on this area of the 12th floor level, that's supporting the 13th floor overhead, that fires burned here and they caused this steel to expand. And the fires effectively, according to NIST, pushed this girder off of its beam seat, which is on the extreme left out of the picture, caused this girder to be unseated, and a progressive collapse ensued. Now, we have gone through and showed that that is absolute nonsense. If we take a look at the video of that day, that collapse, see if we can get that to play. There we go.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen.
I'm just going to stop share, Nick. I have to, if you'll excuse me, I have to, when I share my screen, I have to also share sound. So
Sure.
sorry, I forgot to do that.
That's okay.
Or when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
That's crazy.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department, and they did use the word. We're gonna have to bring it down.
We heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shock.
So you can see the building is coming down at a really steady, smooth rate, as if there's no structure in the way, as if it's sort of free falling.
Yeah.
To get ourselves in orientation, the Twin Towers created these huge debris fields around them. And as you can see, the North Tower, this is actually pointing so that the top of the page is north. World Trade Center 7, the building in question is up here at the top. And you can see that the debris fields from World Trade Center 1 intersect with World Trade Center 7, and it was ostensibly hit by some debris. And oddly enough, that doesn't play into the NIST report. You would think it would be a cause of the collapse. And NIST, when they modeled their building mathematically, they took the trouble of representing the damage that was done to parts of World Trade Center 7 by the falling debris. Yet, oddly, but not surprisingly, their report does not depend on any of this for the collapse. Also, we have strong evidence that the fires that NIST is alleging were happening on level 12 did in fact burn only for a short period and moved on. This is taken roughly 90 minutes before collapse, and you can see that this area where that column and beam, that girder was where I was talking about, have long since gone cold, and the fire has migrated to the west, so it's no longer an issue. And we have evidence supporting everything, every step of the way. It does make me a little bit weary having to rush through it like this, because I cherish every little piece of evidence. So I hope you don't mind, viewers, me flying through it.
Sure.
In their report, NIST are saying that the girder fell off the seat that was carrying it because it didn't have web stiffeners, and it didn't have, it wasn't retained by the column. It was just basically free to slide off. But we have located the steel fabricating drawings. All of that information is actually recorded, and it shows that it's not the way that NIST alleged it was. You see, the girder end was actually fabricated with these vertical plates called stiffeners, and these are a standard feature in structural steel these days. And in the 1970s, when this was going up, this was a relatively new development. It was designed to prevent local buckling and crippling of the end of the girder. Here you can see in this photo, slide number 29, that the girder was photographed indeed with those stiffeners in place. So, and it was also retained inside of that column. So there was really no way that the girder could have slid off its mooring. There was a very careful analysis done by a gentleman called Leroy Halsey, a professor at University of Alaska Fairbanks. he reconstructed World Trade Center 7 bit by bit, and he subjected it to the fire loading that NIST alleges that NIST used in its analysis. And in short, we were unable to come to the same conclusion as NIST. In a nutshell, Professor Halsey basically indicated that in order for the collapse to occur, we would have had to take out 8 floors of the structure in the lower part. He stopped short of using the expression demolition because he does not want himself to be embroiled in any controversial matters. But he was actually hired by our organization, AE 9/11 Truth, and we have mathematically disproven that. Moreover, we have proven unequivocally that it's an impossibility for the collapse to take place, simply because if the joists, these beams that are holding up the floor, if they heated and expanded the way that NIST says they would, they couldn't have pushed the girder off of its seat far enough and caused this failure to happen by bending the flange, because these vertical stiffeners are in place. Now, this is good news for our argument, but it does, in a way, ultimately become moot, because the column wasn't constructed just as a plain I shape. It also had these side plates welded to it for the full height. The reason that was placed there was to stiffen the column so that it was compatible with the other parts of the structure. And you can see if this was pushing on the girder would have had no possible means of escaping that confined area, and the collapse simply would not have happened. I have to push ahead a little bit here. They also say that once that girder fell, that the floor would have collapsed, and it would have led to a pancake collapse of 8 levels, leaving this long, spindly, exposed column. It doesn't make sense to me, however, when I take a look at that plan, I realize that column, this column number 79, is actually supported on every floor by these 2 beams framing into it. So it couldn't have possibly been that unstable as to buckle and fail. So it's really, really treading on thin water. And NIST actually contradict themselves by indicating that in order to keep standing, the building would have had to have those connections anyway. So it's full of contradictions. We also found that if the girder were to actually unseat at that location, the floor slab, because the concrete floor that is, and this is an important aspect of all 3 towers, the concrete and the steel were integrated together so that if the end dipped down, it would only tap the lower level, and the remaining 2 sides, like a diving board, would remain standing. We've even modeled that in a heat sense and found that this would at worst be a dip with potentially a tap of 20,000 pounds onto a level below. And that connection actually had a capacity of something like 600,000 pounds. So there's no way that the collapse could have taken place. So as we go through, we're refuting the NIST left, right, and center. And when they did their mathematical models, NIST included these notches in the middle of their beams, which were actually not there. And this was highly suspicious. It was as if they modeled the structure to collapse on purpose so that all of these beams would hinge and pull the outside walls in to initiate a collapse. There was evidence on the site that was ignored, like this chemically altered steel that was a small bit of the debris taken off the site. And indeed, we're going to see that much of the, if not all, of the material, save for only a few small pieces, were kept, and the rest of the evidence was disposed of. This is something that people don't really appreciate that took place. Let's see here. Something also unknown to the public, this was a thermal image taken, I think, let's see here, it's 5 days after the collapse that indicated very hot areas on the site. This is where the Twin Towers stood. This is where World Trade Center 7 stood. And you can see that the hot areas here are molten steel. Basically, the steel is molten inside that structure. There were eyewitnesses, if you recall, those firefighters that were talking about it being like we were inside of a foundry when they went down into the wreckage. And here I have a picture of the NIST model. When the NIST model is allowed to run its full course and animate the collapse, it actually looks like like a wet cardboard box. And when we looked at the video, we can see that the thing does actually fall down in a nice cohesive manner. I'm just going to quickly play this, and then I have to push ahead to World Trade Center 7. So you see that the whole thing sort of falls in one piece, but it's possible to see a little bit of the collapse initiating at the inside. So what we have basically found is that the collapse could not have taken place unless several floors were removed. It does not happen at all the way that NIST claimed that it does. We have effectively refuted that. So that is World Trade Center 7. It's a very mysterious, and officially NIST's story, they're saying that the building collapsed due to office fires. What lit those office fires isn't really ever discussed. Did the debris flying from World Trade Center 7 ignite the fires? It isn't really made obvious to us how that took place. Weird things were happening there. The 23rd floor was occupied by the Office of Emergency Management, which was something that was set up by Rudy Giuliani following the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. They constructed a bunker up there, which had like 40,000 gallons of diesel. And in the NIST report, they're saying that there was no diesel contributing to the fires. So really suspicious things were going on that day. And the weirdest one was somebody alleging that they were an engineer who worked at the Office of Emergency Management, came down and told firefighters and rescuers, I'm a structural engineer, I've inspected the building, stay out of it because I've noticed that there are some areas that look like they're about to fail and the building is about to collapse. That person, that mystery person who has never been identified, had considerable authority that day, and people listened to him and they were afraid. And the building, the Twin Towers collapsed to 9 or 10 in the morning, and World Trade Center 7 collapsed at 5 that afternoon. So it happened later in the day. Here's now talking about the Twin Towers. I hope I'm not charging ahead too quick.
No, this is good. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, I realize I am. It's kind of inevitable. When you look at this vantage point, this is looking from the north, looking southward. There's the water beyond. You can see World Trade Center 7 is here. It's a kind of a sentinel standing in front of the towers, and you can see the clear line of sight that it has. This is World Trade Center 1, the northernmost tower with the antenna on it, and World Trade Center 7 2, which is the south tower, no antenna on the roof. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the construction of World Trade Center 7 was unlike typical buildings of the day. Typical buildings of the day had columns scattered all throughout the floor plan, and you were navigating a labyrinth of columns on every floor. The goal that they wanted with World Trade Center 7 is, hey, we're going to be building these things like 100 stories plus. We want to be able to attract renters. So what we want to have is we want to have clear, open plans, no columns obstructing. So we're going to construct these as a tube structure. So there will be many columns forming the skin. It's not unlike, I suppose, a Coke can, if you will, an aluminum can, which has like a structural skin on the outside. But because these floors are heavy and they carry a lot of load, there also has to be something called a core, which is a group of interior columns, which are holding more than half of the weight. And bird's eye view, you can see the core is also designed to carry all those elevators. The elevators have to be there. To service a building of these height, it's very elevator intensive. They divided it up into 3 lifts where you started basically at 0 at each of those lifts, which was at about 33% of the overall height. They were intermittent. I think it was something like level 40 and level 80 or thereabouts. And you arrive at those floors, and then there were elevators that were grounded to those floors that could service the rest of the building. So really big challenges have to do with building this high. The core stiffness and the outer tube stiffness are different. So the overstrength relatively is a lot, there's a disparity in overstrength. These inner columns, because they're working harder, they're carrying most of the gravity load, were over-designed by a factor of approximately 3. And the outer columns, because they're engaged also, not just in carrying gravity, but they also start to light up and carry load in the case of resisting wind load, they're over-designed by a factor of 5. So there's a lot of redundancy in these buildings, okay? And as they were built, the steel had a mass of something like 100,000 tons. So this was really appreciable construction. If we look at the mass of the columns at the lower level here, we can see that these plates are something over 5 inches thick that were used in the steel, whereas a piece that's welded up like this, and we're talking about overall dimensions of approximately 2 feet by 5 feet here in this member, we're talking about something that weighs 3,000 pounds per linear foot. And it gets lighter and lighter and lighter as you get to the top. The topmost members were weighing something like 200 pounds per linear foot, and they were just basically a plain I section. Another thing that's not appreciated by people generally speaking is the steel gets heavier and heavier. It also gets stiffer as we get to the bottom level. So as if this ostensibly collapsed, it would be collapsing onto stronger and stronger and stronger structure. And ultimately it would be, we would be expected to pulverize and make go away column sections that were just this massive. I mean, it's hard enough to get those things to, topple over and move. They're so awfully heavy. It's just inconceivable that something like that could take place. The impacts on the towers looked something like this. There were a little bit higher up on the North Tower and a little bit lower on the South Tower. The North Tower stood longer than the South Tower did. And when the plane hit, it hit slightly at an angle. I get a lot of flack from people alleging that there were no planes. Hey, we proved there were no planes. Can we move past that? I haven't really looked at any arguments. I'm not saying that there were planes for sure. I'm just presenting this hypothesis as though we feel that there really were planes. And I believe that they were used really for theater more than anything else, because these buildings were so massive. I mean, we're talking about 300 tons for a plane, and we're talking about 500,000 tons for the building. So the building weighed something like 2,000 times the weight of an airliner. It isn't really going to even shudder when the plane flies into it. Moreover, when you consider the plane is made out of aluminum and it's fairly soft, it has to have the advent of speed to make up for that, because really hard metal like steel is going to shred a relatively soft metal like aluminum, and it's really going to do a number on it. Now, I just want to get to the right slides.
So let's presume that the plane was shredded because it's softer than the steel beams of the towers. Would that mean that the planes never went into the buildings then? So it was shredded and stayed outside. How were the explosives? Because the explosives look like they came from the inside outwards of the building.
Well, what we're saying is that the plane's wings are basically flying fuel tanks, and when those wings would impact that row of columns like they did, that would cause the fuel inside the wings to aerosolize, and that would account for much of the fireball that erupted out of the building when all that jet fuel was turned into spray. Some of it migrated into the building, but we have found that that fuel very quickly burns off, relatively speaking. It's gone, it's consumed within a period of about 5 minutes, and then the structure will cool slightly, as it settles down into burning and consuming the regular combustibles that are inside the building. Here you can see that it did have speed working for it, and NIST, we went along with their descriptions of the damages alleged to the various floor levels. There was clearly a loss of some floor at the lead-in. Now we are looking at the North Tower here, obviously, and like I said, the missile, which was the plane, did have the advantage of speed, even though it was highly, highly disadvantageous because the aluminum metal is much softer than the very hard steel. The NIST report had an isometric construction, a mathematical model of the core columns. Now, this is only showing the interior columns I was talking about, that group that are inside of the building, and so as not to confuse the issue. The outer columns are not shown. Here you can see that NIST have clearly modeled the destruction inside of the footprint. Now, the substance of NIST's collapse theory is essentially this. They are saying that the buildings failed on the outside first. Why that happened, according to them, they are saying that the fires, instead of heating and expanding the beams like they did in World Trade Center 7, the beams in this case sagged and they became soft and they pulled the columns in. Now, this collapse theory is nonsensical because this is omitting one key aspect. The concrete slabs that were poured on top of this, this wouldn't go into tension and pull the column in because the hard concrete slab that was poured on top of this, that deck, is pushing back and resisting this. In order to make its collapse theory work, NIST applied an artificial load of 5,000 pounds at each of these beam connections. These were happening every 6.5 feet or so. That would have resulted in a huge, like 750,000 pound artificial force being added to the outside of this building as it stood at rest. Now, that is absolute nonsense because the floor slabs were mostly still intact and they were causing an equilibrium there. So this mathematical modeling put forward by NIST is absolutely nonsensical. Nick, I hope I'm not going. I guess I know.
Yeah, no. I was going to say, so if planes, are planes capable, in your opinion, of hitting a building and a building coming down like straight down smoothly as if it were to be an intentional demolition?
Well, we'll talk about straight down smoothly, but in my opinion, where I'm at now, I believe that this building could have withstood not just one plane impact and stood standing. For the original designer said that you could practically remove all of the outside columns on one face and 50% of the columns on either adjacent, no, it was actually 33% of the columns on either adjacent face. And due to its redundancy, the loads would basically reroute themselves and the thing would remain standing. I would go so far as to say that this building could have taken multiple plane hits and remained standing as far as the structure goes. It was that redundant.
You don't believe that maybe there were explosives from the inside? So when the hologram planes, that a lot of people believe it was a hologram, they hit the planes, and as they appeared to hit the planes, the explosives were then activated, and there were numbers of, or dozens of explosives. What are your thoughts?
Well, when we go through the end of this engineering analysis, that is sort of the, I guess, area that we are left begging to explore. What could have brought it down? It's quite clear that explosives were used because all of that molten metal that is discovered, all of that unexploded nanothermite that was found on the site is indicating that the only way that that steel could have turned molten is by the use of thermite. And as I look at this collapse, the debris is moving laterally at such high velocity. I can only conclude that kinetic explosives were also added to the mixture, because not only do you have to melt the ends of the steel, but you have to get it out of the way so it doesn't stick around and interfere with the collapse. It has to be brought out of the way. So we're not by a damn sight are we left explaining this collapse and how it took place.
When the collapse finally starts, the antenna started just a little bit before the exterior of the building started. And that tells us that the core columns let go first.
Because we have that antenna on World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, and as Gene Corley, he was the initial investigator for the FEMA, he basically pointed out that antenna is falling a split second before the outer walls fail. Now, NIST is saying that the outer walls of this building failed first and caused the rest of the collapse to ensue. We're saying that that's not the case at all. What actually took place was the core columns had to let go, and our main evidence is that that tower that was that antenna tower that was constructed on the North Tower provides a clear, irrefutable visual indicator, so that what really happened was something more like this. The core was brought down first, and what that caused is a rotation of the floor systems, and that pulled the outside walls in, and that accounts for the bowing that can be seen that was photographed on the outside. That's what actually took place and caused the collapse mechanism. So it's in fact the complete reverse of what NIST say that it was. I unfortunately have to roll on here, and I'm going to just spend time on one more slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the destruction of the evidence. This is that same gentleman from FEMA, and he's talking about evidence disposal.
When did you become aware that the steel from the World Trade Center was being sold off?
I think it was on the order of a week or so before we arrived on site on October the 5th, I believe it was.
So in other words, the city was selling or was disposing of a material within 2 weeks of the actual event?
I believe I was the first one to find out that the steel is being recycled. New York Times reporter Jim Glantz told me 2 weeks after the collapse, and I tried to contact city, and also New York Times reporters tried to make sure we can have access to steel to do the research. It was not happening.
I just think there's so much that has been lost in these last 6 months that we can never go back and retrieve. And it's not only unfortunate, it's borderline criminal.
400 truckloads per day of material were taken away from the World Trade Center site and sent to China for recycling.
There were laws violated in the destruction of that evidence. And for the American Society of Civil Engineers to ignore those events is extremely disturbing and is a violation, in my opinion, of their professional code of ethics.
It was contrary to the way all investigations are done. If an airplane crashes, they seal off the entire area, nobody touches anything, they move it to a secure location, and they reconstruct an aircraft.
Normally, when you have a structural failure, you carefully go through the debris field, looking at each item, photographing every beam as it collapsed and every column where it is in the ground, and you pick them up very carefully and you look at each element. We were unable to do that in the case of Tower 7.
You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science. It's trying to prove preconceived ideas.
According to NIST, these buildings were brought down by fires, and these would therefore have been the first steel high-rise collapses ever in history due to fires. Why on earth would we decide to dispose of the evidence so rapidly after a historical event like this? Boy, shouldn't we stop and try to learn from this? Why did these buildings collapse the way they did? I just wanted to point out one last thing here, and then I'm sorry, I have to push ahead. Yeah, that these they've only saved 236 pieces of steel out of tens of thousands from the Twin Towers, only 236, and only one small piece from World Trade Center 7. This gentleman is from NIST, and he presided over the investigation that NIST conducted. And I take real exception to the way that they handled this evidence. It was like Roland Angle from our group pointed out, it was really, it was a criminal act.
Absolutely, very interesting.
Yeah, sorry, Nick, I've blazed through parts 1 and 2 here. I'm getting now to part 3, and I want to sort of cut to the chase a little bit here. I've got the picture of World Trade Center 7 standing in front of the 2 Twin Towers that have already been hit by aircraft. They're on fire. Smoke is coming out from all over the place. The zeitgeist, as far as this event has been, let's honor and remember the Twin Towers. Nobody really talks about World Trade Center 7. So the zeitgeist is never forget the Twin Towers, but let's try to forget about this one. Really, really odd behavior. There was a lady who made the rounds. Her name is Judy Wood. She presented some of the anomalies that weren't addressed in the official reports. One of them was the free fall speed of collapse. And here she indicated, using just plain kinematics, no structure involved, if each of these floors actually got hit and moved from rest, which would have to happen, the collapse wouldn't take about 10 seconds, which was observed between 10 and 15 seconds, which the Twin Towers were observed to fall at. It would have taken significantly longer than that if we cascaded these and made them additive, because let's not forget, these are at rest when they're impacted. So there's definitely some anomalies that we've seen. One of the anomalies was witnessed by people at Ground Zero on the day that the debris pile looked as if it had disappeared. A famous segment of video was caught on Peter Jennings, where a young George Stephanopoulos is attending the site as a young reporter making a name for himself. And he commented that it was as if the debris disintegrated as it evaporated. Somebody said that it fell through the basement, but he commented that it almost isn't even there. And so those were his initial observations, and people were quite dumbstruck that this didn't look like anything that they were expecting to see, a pile, about as fifth as tall. And people were also pointing out that the debris did scatter all around the site, and it laid down there. So I would have expected to see many more slabs in pieces, because they were reinforced with steel. They should have been more cohesive. So thermite was observed all over the place. And there was the ejecta, debris that was flying at a considerable lateral speed. Why was the intact structure not in the way and dissipating energy? One of the main properties of steel, structural steel as a building material, is it has a property called ductility. And that means it can deform and it can absorb energy. And much like a crushing Coke can, it will crush, and thereby it will actually take energy out of the sledgehammer that's trying to crush it. So we definitely were expecting to see some slowdown as the building crushed. Something I didn't really show in the previous section was the top of the structure that is alleged to be the sledgehammer. It disintegrates upon the fall. It kind of gets out of its own way, and there's nothing left to create the fall. So it's clearly aided by something. Didn't notice how many burned out vehicles there were on Ground Zero. They were all over the place. They were in areas somewhere as much as half a mile away, where the half of the car is intact, brand new, like it came off the showroom floor. The other half is burned like this, and it wasn't even near ground zero. So there were all these, there were obviously kinetics flying around and impacting adjacent buildings, but there were in a area that was sort of relatively free of debris, they were still toasted, and it was peculiar. So Judy pointed these things out. The slabs, what accounted for all the slabs, where the twisting of the steel that was observed. Steel was not kinked as you would expect to see in a cold deformation and a buckling, but parts were bent as if they were, superheated. And why all the dust clouds? There was so much pulverization happening when it was falling. So I'm talking a little bit about Judy Wood, but I want to push ahead and show this is actually underground, underneath the basement of the World Trade Center. This was, it looks as though it's distorted due to heat, well away from the any action, deep underground. This is actually over a subway that ran underneath the complex, okay? Like you had steel that was clearly heat deformed down there. And you also had steel columns that were also clearly heat deformed. This is not a mechanical deformation. This does not happen due to mechanical agitation. This happens due to, there you can see some of the collapse that did make its way through. But there's also this discoloration that appears on the steel as if it was heated and the paint or primer cooked off, and really weird stuff. Sorry, Nick, am I flying through this too quickly?
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, it says a lot when the steel was taken to China, doesn't it? When for them to recycle, because the elites favor, the globalists, they favor China. They're in bed together, so it's very clear who's doing what.
Yeah, well, there may well have been some cooperation there. Just pointing out here that there was actually an agglomeration of concrete and steel mixed together as if it was superheated. They refer to these pieces as meteorites. Funny enough, look at this bending. It's just, you would see something more like this, a kink. Like this is fairly heavy section, so you'd expect to see it sort of kinked mechanically in the end, not twisted to ribbons like this. Look at this one. It's so evenly heated as if it was softened, and it was made pliable due to temperature so that it could bend that way. And clearly these are not from some kind of mechanical effects. I mean, look at this stuff. These are heavier sections lower down in the building that were not in the fire area. These things bent really easily. Here's another meteorite, a bunch of steel and...
But all this heat came from the jet fuel?
No, the heat could not have come from the jet fuel because the jet fuel was only in small areas of the building, and the jet fuel would have been consumed very quickly, and it wouldn't have had the opportunity to heat the steel as badly, because the steel is a couple of things. It's a thermal regulator, so it's going to act like a radiator, and it's going to radiate heat throughout the building. It will suck heat away from the fire area. And what has been ignored in a lot of this fire analysis was the heat sink effect of the concrete floor slabs. Those things would have regulated temperature to a very large degree and would have really evened out that heat. So the fuel is actually almost a negligible effect in all of this due to simply how quickly it's consumed and it's out of the way. So I have to push on here. I'm really compressing it. This is from Judy Wood again. This is ground zero, and it's showing the locations of these toasted vehicles all around New York. And I was talking about these remote locations, Nick. Look how far away this one is, half a mile away. There was a famous photo of a police car taken here. This is FDR Drive. Way the heck and gone out there. Isn't that strange?
Very.
So when I looked at this, I realized, well, look at all this steel that's been heated this way. Look at all these toasted cars. Look at this pulverization of concrete. And look at this third tower that had to collapse and get out of the way. Also, I thought about Maui fires. These are some of the slides taken from the recent Maui events, where the cars were very similar in appearance to what we were seeing in New York. And to me, to my mind, that was a directed energy weapon from space. But this is 2023. We've had the capability of space delivery now. It's been building and building every year. World Trade Center happened in 2001, more than 20 years prior to that. And we didn't have the advanced delivery that we have today. Going back to this, sorry, what were you going to say?
I just said, who knows? Maybe we haven't. They've been hiding it from us.
That could be. I'm leading to a hypothesis based on several factors here. I'm looking at World Trade Center 7, the sentinel here standing in front of the two towers, the Zippo lighter, if you will, with two cigarettes standing in behind it. And we draw a little profile. World Trade Center 7 is drawn not exactly to proportion. Height-wise it is, but it's a little bit closer to the towers than I actually show here. Recall that power station that was in blue. World Trade Center 7 was constructed on top of a power source. In my hypothesis, that would make it the perfect candidate to construct a directed energy weapon on the roof, because the side of the building that was facing the Twin Towers had this rather large storefront on the top two floors, this clear story. It would have afforded a great location to house such a heavy weapon, and it could have been in turn drawing its power directly from that substation, which was at the time several megawatts of power. It powered all of Lower Manhattan, and it would have made the perfect place to plug in this directed energy weapon, which, if it could irradiate all of this steel, and it could cause the cars at ground level to be toasted. Moreover, when we look at Judy Wood's diagram here, I think that as it stood in front, it was approximately here where my cursor is, as it stood in front of the two towers and irradiated them with directed energy, microwave them, there was a bunch of refraction and reflection, and the beam went wild and it got reflected all over the place as it scanned up and down. Here shown in the sweep cone, which is in yellow, it had to scan up and down and irradiate all of the material in the Twin Towers. So I've come to the end of my allotted time there, basically outlining this hypothesis, Nick.
Yeah, very interesting.
After that deluge, what do you think? What are you up to?
Well, thank you. I do apologize, first of all, for the short interview. I know you wanted to go for a couple of hours for this. We're just very tight for schedule. But yeah, so my question is, if Building 7 was somewhat responsible for some energy-directed weapon towards the 9/11, would you say that would be the reason why they wanted to get rid of Building 7, to destroy evidence?
Yes, my hypothesis is taking that into account, because why? Let's not dance around. They rigged these three buildings to demolish them, okay? Why would they go through the trouble to rig Building 7, the third building, with explosives? What was the point? Was perhaps a third plane meant for that building? Was that third plane brought down? We've got a lot of conspiracy theories out there. We don't know what happened in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. People are saying that wasn't even a plane crash. Maybe it wasn't. The point is, they had to bring World Trade Center 7 down. However they did it, they had to do it to conceal that directed energy weapon. That's my hypothesis. I'm not saying I'm right. It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Please prove me wrong. I'm a grown-up. I can take it.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to put it out there for food for thought, because I want people to talk about this, and I want the truth to come out. I don't care how it comes out, Nick. I just want the truth to come out.
Exactly. We all do. Yeah. E.N.G, it's been an absolute honor to have you. Thank you very much for doing all this for us. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
Yeah, I'd basically like to say, keep an open mind and talk amongst yourselves. What we're trying to do nowadays is we're trying to raise consciousness out there. That's really the name of the game. Keep an open mind, talk amongst yourselves. And I guess the next step is, let's find out what the heck these directed energy weapons can actually do. Can we really go that far? Time will tell. We had the congressional hearings recently about the extraterrestrial ships that are out there. This is hiding bigger issues. It's hiding an unlimited power source, 0-point energy. It's potentially hiding other things like this gravity propulsion. And it's also hiding things like directed energy weapons. They're in that category too. So let's shine the light on the truth, shall we?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And E.N.G, we'll speak again very soon. You take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nick. Take care.